Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome into another edition of Final Whistle. As always, I'm your host, Blaine Spencer. I've got a co-host with me today. I've got Tim Best, aka the Igloo podcast with Timmy Ice. He covers Big East basketball, and he's coming on to talk Big East, the bubble, and more. Tim, thanks for coming on. I know you've had some great content that's been coming out lately. You had a couple Marquette interviews recently, or former Marquette players
Right.
recently.
Yeah,
But
but
thanks for
yeah,
coming on.
yeah. Thanks for having me on again, man. So yeah, the Igloo's been busy. I mean, it's March. It's just gonna get even busier. The March Marathon. I'm gonna start Sunday after tomorrow's regular season finales. It's crazy. 11 straight hours of Big East Tube, starting at noon and rolling on at 2:30. 5, 7, and 9. Like for me, as just a general Who's fan, that's heaven. And to get 11 straight hours of Big East Tubes, oh man, like I'm gonna be on cloud nine. It's gonna be a lot of fun, and then start the Big East Marathon, the Igloo March Marathon on Sunday with recaps of that day, and then of course I just new development. I'm going to be getting former Butler small forward Sean McDermott is going to join the show. This is going to be the first time I'm going to get to interview a guy who was a player last season and had his senior season unfortunately cut short due to COVID. So it'll be really interesting to, get to talk in depth with him about everything he was feeling the day when he found out not only was the Big East tournament canceled, but we all know how good Butler was last year. They were going to be a contender in the NCAA tournament. So that's going to be on the way. And of course, a whole lot of great content as, throughout the week as I'm going to be covering the Big East tournament virtually. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Hey, this is March, baby.
Yeah, you can't make it up. It's best month of the year, baby, for us college basketball fans. But you can't write any other script other than March Madness itself. But Tim, let's jump right in. I know this week is a big weekend for the regular season. There are so many different scenarios that can still play out. But we're gonna start talk that's some breaking news that happened last night. Creighton head coach Greg McDermott was suspended indefinitely from the team and from all team activities from the school, the University of Creighton, due to what he said this past weekend that came across as a potential racial slur. He came out and openly apologized a couple days later, knowing that he didn't. It wasn't intended that way. But as soon as he got back from the road trip with the Blue Jays last night, he was suspended. What is your overall take about what transpired in this last week?
From my knowledge, and being able to actually speak earlier this week and actually hearing what one of his former players, Jahen's Maniga, had to say. Jahen's was a prime player on Creighton's really good 2014 squad where Doug McDermott was the leader. And he hosts his own Creighton podcast called The J. It's part of the Field of 68 network. And what he said was, this isn't like this is a repeated pattern of racism on the part of Coach McDermott. He was obviously taken aback. He definitely admitted that those words could not be defended, and it shouldn't even be attempted to be defended. It was absolutely poor word choicing on the part of McDermott, and I, along with Jahens and so many others, of course, we saw what Coach Mac's message was meant to be, but he obviously used egregiously incorrect wording. Essentially, he was trying to get the message of, this is where the journey only begins. Not this is not where it ends, but instead, he obviously said, I can't have anyone leaving the plantation. I it, it's not good. It's not good, and I can't mince my words on that. It's a bad look, and obviously, Coach McDermott was extremely remorseful. It's one thing to apologize, but it's another thing to actually tell your team that you would be willing to resign in order to, you know, mend, make amends with the with your players that you've hurt through your use of words. And I think that speaks a lot to Coach McDermott's character, that, he'd be willing to lose his livelihood if it meant preserving the sanctity of his team. So obviously, I think Creighton suspending him was ultimately the right move. But at a really bad time. They maybe could have waited till the beginning of next season to punish him, because, adding this, given how they've struggled over the last couple of games, this is the last thing you want, because this is a Creighton team that, you look at them on paper, this is a real Sweet 16 contender, man. They could make it to the second weekend of the tournament. They had a chance to do it a year ago, and they were robbed of that because of COVID. And, it's just really unfortunate. And the reactions have been crazy. Jahens was one of those guys that actually sympathized with Coach Mack and accepted his apology. Other players like Mo Watson, who was leading the country in assists for Creighton a few years ago, Mo instantly questioned the sincerity of the apology. So it's been a mixed bag. I don't blame anyone for not being able to forgive Coach Mack, because, you can't take back your words. Once they're said, you can't go back and change them. So I think obviously the damage has been done. And for Coach Mack, he's got a lot of work to do if he wants to regain the trust of his team, and of course the university that has kept him at the helm now for the past 11 years.
Yeah, for me, the suspension was inevitable. It was going to happen whether he liked it or not. I'm surprised that the presidents and the university didn't suspend him on the road trip. I was actually surprised that they let him finish the road trip. I think they were trying to figure out all the details. That could have been part of it, but I was very surprised that he wasn't immediately suspended or put on pause from being dismissed from the team immediately, just because of how it all transpired. Yes, it was probably the worst misuse of words I've seen in a long time, because we know Coach McDermott, he is all about his players, and his players still wanted him to coach. I think that they still want him to coach.
Yeah, because
his players on his current team want him to still coach.
Yeah, so Max said, like, if that's what it takes, I'm willing to resign, but his players insisted that he stay on.
Yeah, but it's inevitable. It was just such a bad look, and I think the suspension only had to happen now because of the mixed bag of responses that he's gotten. As soon as you get a couple people that question his sincerity of his apology, or even question the language that he was using, it's over from there. Like, you have to. It doesn't matter at that point. We know Coach McDermott's a great basketball coach. He's a great mind, but he really threw himself. He probably dug himself 100 feet into the ground this past weekend, and he has now a lot of work to dig himself out, because I think this will not end swiftly at any time. This could really jeopardize his career, especially depending on how more and more people respond to the language that was used. I know he was trying to focus on team camaraderie, but it just was not the correct way to approach the entire situation. So, and we do not condone any of the words he said. We condone all of the words he says. We're not supporting that in any way. We know that was completely wrong, but it's what happened, and we have to talk about it, because it's super news for a potential second week team in March Madness that now, again, they've looked very bad the last two games. Not just bad, they've looked egregiously bad against Xavier and Villanova. So it's going to be really interesting to see if this team can even bounce back. Do you think they will bounce back?
I thought about this, and I kind of question now as they face Butler tomorrow, but you also got to look at, like, okay, Butler clearly not a tournament team, and they are really bad on the road compared to at home. They went 7-3 at home in conference play. They're just 1-8 on the road. Yeah. So I would trust Creighton winning at home, but I would not be surprised if they eked out a win and barely. And another thing about the whole McDermott situation, if this was a repeated pattern, my opinion would be completely different on this. But since this is the first and only instance that we've seen of McDermott showing ignorance, I just don't think that it's that bad. Well, obviously what he said was bad, but if this were a repeated offense, then I would be looking more for him to actually, not only his own resignation, but for even the athletic director and the university to force their hand and force that resignation out of him.
Yeah. So we're going to see how the Creighton Blue Jays respond. It's going to be really intriguing to see. Luckily, that team has a lot of upperclassmen and senior leadership. So to Mitch Ballock, Marcus Zagorowski, it's time for you to basically become the coach. I know they're going to have an assistant coach step in, but it's going to be based off of the players now. Coaching's not going to be able to handle this with McDermott gone. It's all going to come down to the play of the players. So we'll see how this goes. And I think it's really interesting this weekend. A lot of different scenarios are still available in the Big East. So what is the biggest game that's really you have your eye on this weekend to try and look at seeding and et cetera?
Like in an unbiased way, I think the last two games you're going to see this year, the main one being Seton Hall St. John's, the other being Xavier at Marquette. Those are going to be the big games that determine, okay, who gets a bye, who doesn't. Because for Seton Hall, it's pretty simple. If you win Saturday, you get the number 4 seed in the Big East tournament. Signed, sealed, delivered. You got it. But if they lose, that's where things kind of get tricky. Because if you're Seton Hall, you want to be sure you get that first round bye. And you want that because Villanova is your number 1 seed. And Villanova just lost their heart and soul, Colin Gillespie. And that makes Villanova look a heck of a lot more invincible. Because when you lose a guy that's that talented, that's cerebral, that just plays the game in such an intelligent way that makes everyone around him better, that team's going to take a major hit, and that takes them out of contention for being a Final Four team. And that's just me being brutally honest. I mean, that team could not go as far as they would expect without the leadership on and off the court of Colin Gillespie. So, you want to be in that 4-5 game to get a first round bye. The easy way to do it is just by beating St. John's, but they could still find a way to be in that 4-5 game. And the only way that happens, even if they lose, they would need Xavier to lose as well at 9:00 that night. And Xavier, they got a lot to play for because their tournament resume is now being questioned. If they have a losing conference record, that's going to hurt them big time. And
for sure.
And they're another team like Butler that has been significantly better at home than on the road. They're 5-2 at home in conference, but they're just 1-4 on the road. Their only road win came, I believe, against Butler way back in January. And ever since they came off that second COVID pause, in the middle of February, they have not looked like themselves. They've lost 4 of their last 6. They lost at Georgetown. They lost to UConn at home without Book Night. They lost at St. John's. They got smacked at Providence. Like, this Xavier team is not looking like that surefire team we were looking at the end of January. So essentially, you're playing for your tournament lives at this point. And in a way, this feels like deja vu from last year because Xavier was in that prime spot heading into the final week of the regular season, looking like a lock to be in the tournament, but they lose their last 2 regular season games. And then they lose in the first round of the Big East tournament against DePaul, who finished dead last. And if the tournament happened, Xavier wasn't going to make it. They were going to be in the NIT. So there is that sense of deja vu. And I think if Xavier really wants to avoid that, you obviously have to win at Marquette. But Marquette has been playing really well. They beat North Carolina last week in Chapel Hill. They beat DePaul on the road. They're trending upward. And I think if me being objective, Marquette's the more talented team. And Xavier lost a guy who's gave them so much depth on the perimeter in the form of Nate Johnson. I think at one point he was leading the entire country in 3-point field goal percentage. That takes that element away from them, and that's what brings Xavier down. And I really do think that Xavier's in major jeopardy going to Milwaukee Saturday night. I really do believe they're going to lose. So, in that,
is that your bold prediction right there? Bold prediction. You think Xavier loses on Saturday?
Yeah, I really do. I mean, you look at what Marquette has: Dawson Garcia, DJ Carton, Greg Elliott has been a revelation in the starting lineup, and then Kobe McEwen, being the mature senior leader that he is, he's taken a bench role and taken it in stride. He's been looking really good off the bench and giving him that extra push and depth at the shooting guard position. So and not to mention, you got the best shot blocker in the league in the form of Theo John, and also helps that you get another really good freshman, Justin Lewis, back into the mix after missing the last few games. I like Marquette winning, and I think another thing, I think with Seton Hall, St. John's, I think if you're Seton Hall, you got to win this game. St. John's is without Posh Alexander still. I know they just beat Providence, but St. John's, man, if they win on Saturday, which I think there's a very good chance that they will, they're going to be right back in the tournament conversation, possibly being, the number 4 seed in the Big East tournament if they were to win this game and also get a little bit of help with Xavier losing as well. So, I mean,
Do you
there's a
think
lot
the
of
Johnnies
storylines.
still have an outside chance?
With the way that they're playing, they're such a sleeper team. If they can get the proper matchups in the Big East tournament, getting a top 4 seed for starters and winning your quarterfinal game, and then getting that rubber game with Villanova in the semifinals. If they go to the Big East championship game and they have a 10-9 conference record in the regular season, I really think you have to consider them more in the tournament. But obviously, if they lose on Saturday to Seton Hall, I think they're done unless they win the Big East tournament.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. But in reference to Seton Hall was trending in the wrong reasons this week. Bryce Aiken, he finally came back from his injury. And we talked about this on Tuesday. If you hadn't seen my podcast on Tuesday, we thought Bryce Aiken was going to be an X factor, and he was absolutely non-existent. And then he decided to be trending on all over social media. As everyone may know, if you've seen the clip, he was 23 of 23 from the free throw line. And he goes up, starts talking trash at the free throw line, and said, "I ain't missing," or something along those lines.
Yeah, the exact wording.
I think there was also some prerogative language in there that I didn't want to say either. So
yes, I think the correct wording was, "I ain't never missing this."
Yeah, but there was I think he had some explicit language, so we're gonna keep it PG. But but he ends up almost airballing, barely kisses the iron on the first one. Then then let alone not just missing the first one, he misses the second one, and now he's blowing up all over because he missed both of them after talking all that trash in the UConn game on Wednesday, which was pretty much a play-in game for either of those teams into the NCAA tournament. And UConn now has pretty much solidified themselves as a lock in the tournament. And I think, in my opinion, I think, Tim, you agree as well. And now the Hall is on the outside looking in. So it's going to be really, what is your take on this whole Bryce Aiken situation that took place?
I grew up playing basketball my whole life, and, a major point of emphasis that my dad, who coached me, and then his good friend who was an assistant coach for mine, they always emphasize the importance of free throws, and the way you become a good free throw shooter is not really more so the skill. It's about the routine. And if it becomes routine, it becomes muscle memory. And what we saw was simply Bryce Aiken falling out of routine by, trying to get a little cocky. Like it went from confidence.
You're down like eight, what was it, 7 or 8 points at that point? It's not like you're in the game, but like it's not like you're ahead by 20.
It was a 14-point swing. They went from up 7 or right around the 4-minute mark of the first half to down 7 early in the second half. And then Aiken goes to the line. Obviously you want to be confident in your abilities, but you don't try to make that public by trying to say, I ain't never missing this. Like, just if your free throw routine is just keeping your mouth shut and just, quietly just going about your routine, just making your free throws. And that's what worked the first 23 times. You need to keep doing that. And taking himself out of that routine threw him off completely, and it showed because he missed the first free throw short. And then on the second one, the adjustment he tried to make was putting a little more oomph on it. And what do you know? He misses off the back iron. So he, as DJ Khaled says, like, congratulations, you played yourself.
For sure. But let's transition, because as we're talking Seton Hall, Bryce Aiken, like, just that's almost like what are you doing moment? Like, why? But let's jump to the bubble for a second, because I know we've got a couple Seton Hall teams that are not Seton Hall teams, Big East teams, excuse me, that are on the bubble right now. As we've been mentioning, Xavier is right now, according to Joe Lunardi, we're looking at Joe Lunardi's stuff, because if you guys don't know, again, I've interviewed Joe Lunardi last week So please go check out that interview. But the Igloo also interviewed Joe Lunardi last month. So go check it out. We're hyping up Joe Lunardi with our podcast right now.
Oh, yeah.
So go check those out. We had two great interviews with Joe Lunardi. So it was a pleasure having him on. So we're going to give Joe Lunardi some love and look at his bubble watch. So his last 4 buys as of today: Louisville, Rutgers, Georgia Tech, VCU. Rutgers really sliding when we thought they were almost a lock at some point. Now, last 4 in, we have Drake, Michigan State. Here's our first Big East squad, Xavier. And then Boise State is the last team in. First team out is the Seton Hall Pirates. Then you have Utah State, St. Louis, Duke. And then the next 4 out: Syracuse, SMU, Memphis, Ole Miss. So, Tim, based off of what I'm talking about, what are you most intrigued to see? And do you see any teams that are going to be able to make their way in, and some teams that are going to potentially fall out on the bubble?
Well, I think you got to start with the mid-major Drake. I think if you don't make it to the Missouri Valley title game, I think you fall out completely. Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially if they lose tonight, which, I mean, that'll be as crushing a blow as you could possibly get. And it's crazy to think Drake was the 3rd to last team to lose a game this season. As crazy as that sounds.
Now they barely have a chance of getting in, which is almost absurd.
Yeah, so obviously Arch Madness, anything can happen out in St. Louis, but if you're Drake, you got to weather the storm. You have to make it to the Missouri Valley final if you want to be absolutely sure you get in. Michigan State, I think if they lose again to Michigan Saturday, which I think there's a very good chance that they will, that's going to inhibit them from cracking the field, especially unless they go to Indianapolis for the Big Ten tournament and win a few games there. Boise
I think
State,
for Michigan State, they have to make this game look competitive. It wasn't even close the other night. So you got to make this game respectable to keep the committee in check, don't you think? You got to at least put up a respectable showing, because you got routed the other night.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be at the Breslin Center. Now you're holding serve at home, and they've looked better at home in the last few games. You know, they beat Illinois
Aaron
not
Henry's
too long
been an
ago.
absolute stud these past couple weeks. He's finally come into his game a little bit.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. So I think if Michigan State wants to be on the right side of the bubble, I think you got to pull an upset here. But if they lose, it's again, you got to be competitive in order to, be on the right side of the bubble. So there's a way you can still be on that right side, even in a loss. But the only way you do it is by staying competitive against the number 2 team in the country, which there's no doubt Michigan ain't going to be number 2 come next week, given how Illinois annihilated them in Ann Arbor earlier this week. But
without Io too.
Yeah, that's another thing.
And Illinois, they beat Ohio State in the game before that without Dosunmu. They played their 2 best games without Dosunmu in the lineup. It was absolutely absurd to me.
Yeah, I think they are really padding their resume and asserting themselves as that last number 1 seed. I really do believe that. But you talk about another thing is crazy. With Xavier, this was a team that was, they were lucky enough to only have like 13 games, after the month of January. They were like 4-2 in conference. They were 11-2 overall. So they were right at that 13-game minimum. And since then, they've just fallen apart, like I said before.
Yeah, and you have them losing again as your bold prediction to lose tomorrow night against Marquette. And if you lose there, you're pretty much done. Otherwise, you have to make the Big East final to have any chance of moving yourself back in.
I totally agree with you. And when it comes to Seton Hall and Xavier, right now, Xavier in, Seton Hall out. In my opinion, based on certain results that might happen, if Xavier loses on Saturday, which I think they will, and if Seton Hall wins and they end up, getting a win in the Big East tournament along the way as well, I think there's only a few ways you can go about judging Seton Hall and Xavier being tournament eligible. I think you either have just one of them in, the one being Seton Hall, you have both of them in, or you have none of them in, because I just don't see how you can justify Xavier being in the field given how Seton Hall whacked them back in December. I just can't see any sort of justification. So Seton Hall, it's really simple. You win at St. John's, you get a little bit of help from bubble teams that
Well,
are
they could be
probably
playing
in.
each other in that quarterfinal game, though, right? Because
They could
if
be. They
both of them
could be.
hold serve this weekend, it'll be Seton Hall Xavier in that quarterfinal matchup,
It
and
will
that
be.
would
Yeah,
almost become a play-in game, basically.
I agree with you there. And I think if Xavier wins that game, then you probably are going to be more suited to put Xavier in the field. So I think the big thing is if you're Xavier, you absolutely got to find a way to win at Marquette. But the way they've been playing, I just don't see that happening, especially without having such a tremendous threat on the perimeter with Nate Johnson. Like that, essentially you had to like find like superhero type performances from guys like Paul Scruggs and Zach Fremantle to like make up for that.
Yeah.
And you can't rely on those two guys that heavily because eventually that's going to take a toll on them. And I think we're starting to see that take a toll on them because none of the other guys behind them have stepped up enough in order for them to win basketball games. And I just think we're going to see that again in Milwaukee tomorrow.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see. I do like that Marquette pick a lot. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of motivation Xavier has in a much needed game, but also a lot of like a trap game, as you mentioned, how they've struggled on the road. Tim, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to list the teams that are on the outside, the 8 squads that are on the outside right now. Give me a couple that you think really have a great shot of working themselves back into the bubble. So we have Seton Hall, Utah State, St. Louis, Duke, Syracuse, SMU, Memphis, and Ole Miss at the moment. Out of those 8 teams, just give me a couple that you think really have a legitimate shot of working their way into the field.
I think the first team, and I'm probably biased in my thinking, but I think it's Seton Hall because you can play yourselves into the tournament by beating St. John's and Queens and then going into the Garden and winning that quarterfinal game in the 5-4 matchup and getting a shot at Villanova in the semifinals. Now, I know Villanova is going to be without Colin Gillespie, but a win against Villanova is still going to count the same. And Seton Hall, the big thing with their resume is that they lack a signature win. If they get it against
Their only
Villanova,
quad 1 win is UConn.
Yeah, so if they get that win, and the win against UConn has an asterisk next to it because they didn't have book night. So
and UConn's looked absolutely unstoppable since book night's come back too.
Agreed. So and because of his return, they've locked themselves into the field. So if you're Seton Hall, I know beating Villanova without Gillespie's going to look tainted, but you got to look at each opportunity. Like if they win the next 3 games, that puts themselves in the Big East final against, I think it's going to be UConn that ends up being there with how hot they've been. And I just don't trust Creighton being embroiled in all that controversy. I think it's going to be too much of a distraction for them heading into New York City next week. So I think Seton Hall is at the top of the list. And I think the next best option out of those teams that you listed, I think number 2 is Duke. As crazy as that sounds, if they beat Carolina on Saturday,
they'll move right into the field.
I think they will. And, given how weak the ACC has looked, the door is open for them to make a run in that conference tournament. It's not a runaway with it being Virginia's league or even Florida State's league. Like, I really do believe that Duke has as good a shot as anybody else in the conference, as far as I'm concerned, as crazy as it sounds, given no Jalen Johnson, but shockingly, they've looked just as good as even better without him. So I think Duke is that number 2 position in terms of who's in the best position to play themselves in. And then I think the third team is St. Louis.
Yeah, and I agree. I think St. Louis the Billikens have a great shot. I can't remember what side of the bracket they're on, but I think if they win tonight, you get Bonaventure in the semis. I want to say.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Because I think they were the 4 seed coming in, so that would put them getting the Bonnies in the semis. But there's your chance. Your chance to play yourself in. You beat Bonaventure, you pretty much played yourself into the field. And then it's probably them against VCU in the final. And then you probably get potentially 3 teams out of the A10 now instead of 2. Because I think St. Bonaventure's already pretty much solidified themselves as a team in at the moment. So I think it's really interesting to see because you have VCU. they have they're one of the last 4 buys that are in the dance, so they can't have a hiccup. I think they're playing right now. Actually, I think they are. Yes, they are. They're up early. They're playing Dayton right now. If you want to go check that out, NBCSN. But yeah, no, the
Friday
Pelicans,
10,
they have a
baby.
real trap game, I think, though, tonight. I can't remember who they're playing off the top of my head. Here, let me pull it up.
I feel like it's on the tip of my tongue, and now I just can't remember it. It's
Yeah,
not,
no, I'm pulling it up right now. I'm trying to see.
So St. Louis, I think they're playing UMass right now. I think VCU gets Dayton, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, VCU's playing Dayton. Oh, St. Louis just won today. St. Louis beat UMass already today. So, yep, good call. So they've handled business. They beat them convincingly too. Beat them by 15. So it's gonna be interesting. I think, yeah, St. Louis. I'm pretty sure they get the Bonnies this either tomorrow or Sunday. I can't remember.
It might be tomorrow, and then you get a full week off, and you play the A10 championship game next Sunday.
They would play, I think, tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, and then what's going to happen? The big question is now.
And the A10's been really competitive. I think people have really slept on that conference. You have a Davidson team that's well over 500. George Mason has really flown under the radar. I think that tournament's really up for grabs. I think more than people actually realize.
I totally agree with you there. I mean, the A10, it's a deep conference, and everyone was talking like, oh, this is Richmond's conference to lose. Well, they lost it already. I mean, they finished as the 8th seed. They lost in the second round of the tournament.
Yeah, Duquesne knocked them out.
Yeah, so it's just a testament to just how good the other programs have been. St. Bonaventure's taken that major leap. St. Louis was expected to be a really, really good team. They have the talent to make the tournament. Now it's just a matter of just putting it all together. They got by the first hump, beating UMass. But if they get that win over St. Bonaventure, I think that all but solidifies them being in. But it's going to be barely in. Like, I think they're going to be that very last team in the field. But, I'm intrigued to see what the other bracketologists are going to have to say regarding, what the other bubble teams are going to look like, after this weekend, because you can have a lot of movement going around because we don't know what Drake's going to do in the Missouri Valley tournament. We don't know what's going to happen with Seton Hall and Xavier in their game Saturday. And we don't know where Michigan State's going to stand after potentially losing twice in 3 days against Michigan, chance to get another signature win and, blowing that opportunity potentially.
Yeah. And then for me, my other team other than St. Louis, I think the Syracuse Orange have a real opportunity. Their season's over. They get to sit back this weekend and just watch the cookies crumble, as you may say, and see teams fall back and really don't handle business. And they had 2 quality wins this week. You beat Clemson and North Carolina. Those are some 2 solid wins out of the ACC. And then you make a couple of wins in the ACC tournament. I think they have a real opportunity, and they're humming at the right time too. They've figured it out with Boeheim, as well as Guerrier and Richmond. I think they have a real opportunity here, especially this weekend, because they don't play this weekend. They just get to sit back and enjoy the ride. So
yeah, and hey, let's not forget Alan Griffin, man. By the way, son of Adrian Griffin, legendary Seton Hall forward, who is an NBA champion assistant coach with the Raptors.
15 a game, 15-6.
Yeah, and I mean he's great on the defensive end too. I mean, having that kind of length on the defensive end is what makes Syracuse, even when it seems like they're not going to be in, like they find a way to get in that conversation around this time every year, and it's like a March tradition like no other, man. Like as someone from upstate New York, like it really is just a yearly trend of Syracuse just making this real late unexpected push. And then, Selection Sunday comes like, could they actually make it? And it's been like that since like 2016.
Oh, they got in somehow, as always. Somehow snuck themselves in too, usually.
Yeah, you never know. In 9 days, we're going to find out.
Yeah, well, Tim, I appreciate you taking some time coming on, talking some college hoops. Where can everybody go catch out your content?
So it's the Igloo with Timmy Ice. It's a podcast that I produce on Anchor, but it's available wherever you find your podcasts. I know Apple Podcasts is a popular site that a lot of people are on, being Team iPhone and whatnot. So Apple Podcasts, probably your best place to look, but it's on Anchor and several other platforms. So be on the lookout for that. And of course, I'm going to have an episode a day starting on Sunday. And it starts with that interview with Sean McDermott. And then I'm going to go in depth with Jehens Maniga, talking more about the whole situation with Coach McDermott. And of course, talking about his playing career at Creighton, helping them elevate themselves from, being that lovable mid-major in the Missouri Valley to being, one of the top teams in the entire country in their first year in the Big East all the way back in 2014.
Yeah, be on the lookout. Timmy Ice has some great content coming out on the Igloo podcast. As always, everyone, that was your Friday edition of Final Whistle. Go enjoy some college basketball this weekend. It's tournament week and on some teams, and it's the wrapping up of the regular season for others. It's going to be a really fun week. And as Tim said it, Selection Sunday is only 9 days away.
Single digits.
How absurd. It's remarkable that we got here. Enjoy your weekend, everyone. Good night.